welcome back to the Wellness Paradox podcast. I'm so grateful that you can join us on this journey towards greater human flourishing. As always, I'm your host, Michael Stack, an exercise physiologist by training and a health entrepreneur and a health educator by trade. And I'm fascinated by a phenomena I call the wellness paradox. This paradox, as I view it, is the trust, interaction, and communication gap that exists between fitness professionals and our medical community. This podcast is all about closing off that gap by disseminating the latest, most evidence-based, and most engaging information in the health sciences. And to do that in episode 85, we're joined by Janet Omstead. Now, Janet is a personal trainer and a health coach by trade, but really what she's transitioned into, as we'll talk about in this episode, is a play expert. And this is how Janet frames exercise, less through the lens of the traditional no pain, no gain, feel the burn, boot camp workouts you do in the gym, but more through the lens of how you truly enjoy what you're doing from a movement perspective, how you make movement meaningful, and how this can allow us to get to the other 80% of the population that our industry typically doesn't serve. I absolutely love Janet's perspective on this, very similar to other guests that we've had on the podcast, where we expand our horizons with the people we work with in terms of what constitutes exercise and movement that is health enhancing. I think you're going to find Janet's message very inspirational and very insightful, and we're going to talk a little bit about her book, aptly named The Playbook, and I think you'll find this to be an amazing resource. Any resources that we'd like to share with you from today's episode can be found on the show notes page by going to wellnessparadoxpod.com/episode 85. Please enjoy this conversation with Janet Omstead. Today, we're delighted to be joined by Janet Omstead. Janet, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me on the show, Michael. I've been a listener for a while, so I'm really happy to be here.
Awesome. Well, we appreciate you listening, and I'm excited about this topic because we've had guests before that have talked about alternative ways to get people to think about movement and exercise, and I think that's so important because we know that there's only a small portion of the population that actually really enjoys getting in there and sweating and feeling the burn and all these things that we associate with exercise. So we're going to dive into that and your book during this conversation. But before we launch into that, why don't you just tell us a little bit more about you and your background?
Sure. Well, health and fitness is actually my second career. I started after university working as a researcher and an associate producer interviewing athletes for CTV Sports here in Toronto, in Canada, and then had the privilege of working on 2 Olympic Games. Oh, wow. So that was kind of fun, a little piece of my history. But when I was 24 years old, I nearly lost my life. 6 weeks before I got married, I had a ruptured ovarian torsion. It's a female problem, but I was bleeding internally. I didn't know it. And I lived, which is amazing. So I vowed then to always listen to my body and never take my health for granted. So with that, I've always loved to be active. I'm a long distance runner. And so in early 2000, I got certified as a personal trainer and have spent 20 plus years in the fitness and health industry, also as a level 2 certified precision nutrition master behavior change coach. And I'm actually currently working towards my NBHWC board certification. And so today I'm a play expert and a health coach. And using my play method, I help people with their movement, nutrition, sleep, stress, and my clients are busy, successful professionals ready to get their health back. They're strapped for time, they have too much stress, not enough sleep, and are used to putting other people's needs before their own. I'm sure there's a lot of listeners that can relate to that. Yeah. So with my support, they practice those skills around exercise, nutrition, wherever they're at in their life, in a practical, playful way, because I think it needs to have an element of fun, because if it's not fun, you won't do it. Yeah. So as a result, they improve their health markers, they lose weight, move easier depending on their goal, and feel better. And best of all, they pursue what they really want most in life, whether it's running around with their grandkids or chasing their bucket list goals or simply enjoying their day-to-day lives with energy and vitality. And because honestly, when you're healthy and playful, life is better, really. Anyway, I am married to an awesome guy. I have two amazing humans I made with him, and they're in their 20s now. One adorable dog, he's behind me on my couch. He doesn't leave my side very much. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a lover of all things play, and play, I mean, as in movement, exercise, and play as in please look after yourself. So that's me.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. The client you said that you worked with, that client type, I think a lot of our professionals can not only resonate because on some level they are that person, but on another level, that's the type of person we most commonly work with. So I'm very interested to dive into your play method. And you wrote a book on this, which you were nice enough to send to me. And I was feverishly thumbing through in preparation for our podcast. What inspired you to write a book? I mean, writing a book is not a small undertaking. Like I've thought of like the idea of writing a book several times, and it becomes so daunting so fast. What was your inspiration actually to write the book before we get into talking about the book?
Sure. Well, I actually am on a mission to reignite people's passion for play so they can fight chronic disease while improving their life as they age. And as a trainer, this is where my inspiration really came from. I amassed tons of certifications and credentials, but no matter how many skills or knowledge I gained over time, something seemed really off to me, and it didn't sit well with me. And everywhere I looked outside of the fitness industry, people think exercise as a chore.
Yeah.
And the stats are real, right? 1.4 billion people do not do enough physical exercise to keep healthy, which is 150 minutes a week.
Right.
And that's just a little over 20 minutes a day. So many people avoid exercise because they hate going to the gym. I mean, I love the gym. It's not the only place I like to play, but there's a whole population out there that don't like the gym, or they like the gym and they're exhausted and they look miserable. And so I realized something that was missing was play, and play as in also belonging regardless of your shape and size. But it's absent from so many books and challenges and resolutions, right? That's not where the focus is. So I really wrote the book for 3 reasons. 1, people make exercise too complicated. 2, the statistics that I just mentioned on inactivity, they haven't changed since 2001.
Right.
I have a problem with that. Like, I don't believe it has to be that way. Yeah. I actually want to make a difference in the world. And I believe by writing the book, getting it out of my head and into people's hands, that we can integrate health and fitness seamlessly into our lives, with a playful approach. And I guess the 3rd reason was I want people to understand that all movement matters, not just the time in the gym. So when we reframe exercise as play, which my book is about, and it's a tool, it's not a do this, do this, do this. It's as a coach, right? I don't tell people what to do. I walk beside them. Yeah. So here's the framework. Consider your life, your lifestyle, your environment, like all the behaviors you currently have. And stop looking at it as exercise. Because, if we're going for a walk with a friend or playing with our grandkids, that's exercise. Yeah. Right? Yeah. I'm not talking to the people that want to, hypertrophy or, win a competition. I'm talking to the 80% that, don't necessarily want to fit into their skinny jeans. Yeah. They actually want to create a better life. So that's why I wrote my book.
I love it. And what you said about writing it from the perspective of a coach that's looking to walk alongside somebody was something that became very clear as I was reading the book. We are very, broadly speaking, as an industry, we're very good at telling and not very good at listening and collaborating. And, I consider myself a coach as well. And I appreciated that about the book. We'll certainly link up to the book on the show notes page so everyone has the opportunity to check it out, which I would highly recommend. But let's dive into your method here. And specifically what you think is important for fitness professionals to extract. I mean, there's so much great information that you just said and so much great information in the book that I'm going to ask you somehow, some way to succinctly narrow this down into some of the high level points. So what are the big things you think that fitness professionals should be taking from your message?
Well, that's a really good question. I think, especially for new trainers or someone new to the fitness industry or a veteran, right? I think the most important thing for fitness professionals is to meet people where they're at. Mm-hmm. Use a language they understand and keep it simple. No one really needs, we learn about the biomechanics and, mm-hmm. The kinetic chain and all those things when you're first trained and you're in a gym and you see someone, oh, that's the bicep brachia and the, all those connectors. Like, we got to keep things simple and in a language they understand. So, for years, I wrote amazing exercise plans and nutrition meal plans, and they were unique, every single one of them, and individual. But how many people do you think did them? Right. I was assuming too much. That's the problem, right? And so I think we need to appreciate what people like to do versus what we tell them to do. And then I'd say the second thing is I encourage fitness professionals to think outside the box.
Yeah.
Our jobs don't have to be within the four walls of a gym. If that's where your client likes it, great. But we have an opportunity to teach people how to make it playful and fun. And we know from our training, there are hundreds of variations and ways to do, the functional movements, push, pull, squat, rotation. And you can do them with all sorts of body weight and load the muscles, all sorts of places, all sorts of ways. But also you can take all of that outside in a park.
Yeah.
Here yesterday, I was training a client in the park down by our lake on Lake Ontario. It was freezing. It was -12 here, but it was his choice. He's like, I'd really like to go outside and train. I said, fabulous, let's go. Yeah. And so the sun was rising. He was smiling. And when it was over, he's like, oh my God, that was so fun. Yeah. And that made me feel great because I did my job, right?
Yeah.
And even, Dan Buettner with the Blue Zones, I love his work because he really speaks to this point. The longest living people in the world have never stepped foot in a gym.
Exactly. Yeah.
And they're living a long life. So they're doing something right. So I think we can learn a lot from that method. And I guess the third thing, start small and build slowly. If you're with a client that's never really been in the habit of exercise, and the idea of 22 minutes seems daunting, right? That's a lot. How can we make it into manageable chunks? Give them options. Okay, never done 22 minutes a day. Well, you can do that over the course of a day. Doesn't have to be done all at once. 5 minutes of movement, 5 times. Yeah. If we're talking about 20 minutes, I round it down to 20 because it's 22, but, or 8 minutes of movement 3 times, or 11 minutes of movement twice.
Yeah.
Someone can do that. Someone might be like, oh my God, I can totally take 5-minute breaks throughout my day while I'm on Zoom calls.
Yeah.
Awesome. This is for health. We're not, like I said, we're not talking about building specific training for a marathon. We're talking about everyday movement. And you can also actually make 20 minutes a goal rather than the starting point and break things down so that they can take a year working up to that.
Yeah.
So you start at 5 minutes a day and you add 1 minute a day each month. And then at the end of the year, you'll be at 17 minutes a day. And so you'll have built a regular daily habit, which is something a lot of people are never achieving.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, you start the book out in a really interesting way because you're an exercise person. It's very clear. I'm an exercise person. A lot of our listeners are exercise people, but you start out by saying that this is not an exercise book. Why'd you start there? Why is that so important?
Well, there's the reason that I started that way is, well, first, fit people, the 20%, don't need another exercise book.
Yeah.
Right? The lever to get someone incrementally fitter is very, very small and our industry focuses on those incremental gains, sorry. And then the lever is actually huge for an inactive person to get moving. And that was such an important consideration. Language matters.
Yeah.
If we're talking exercise and no pain, no gain, and, how about let's reframe this as play and as a way to get them motivated. So writing another exercise book wasn't, yes, of course, the framework is all built around cardio, and it's around strength, it's around the mind connection. I do speak with experts about those things, but really for the average person, I didn't want to write an exercise book because actually I Googled yesterday and I was curious how many how many exercise books came up on Amazon,
Only
how to exercise.
Yeah.
So 90,000 of them. And I'm sure they're all great. I really respect the amount of people that tackle writing a book. But inactivity is still its own pandemic, and opening a different conversation or mindset with a client or someone reading the book to not focus on something that they don't enjoy. And I guess the last part, I care very much. I think I said it earlier about keeping it simple, and play as exercise is simple. Yeah. Who doesn't like to play, right? We don't have to work out. We get to play. Yeah. That's just a big mind shift for people when they hear that. And, we both know, and the audience will understand this very well. And someone who's never listened to your podcast will too. This will really hit home. 6 out of the top 10 non-communicable diseases are linked to inactivity. Yeah. And it's preventable with play. Yeah. If you open your mind that way. And so play is a catalyst for feeling good. So when you feel good, you want to eat better. When you want to eat better, you sleep better. And it's a positive spiral for change that I think is the fundamental habit that's available to everyone, and they can make it fun.
Yeah, I love it. I have a good friend of mine, Tony Moreno, has been on the podcast before. He's a researcher at Eastern Michigan University. He talks about exercise is not looking at it as exercise, but looking at it as adult recess. And
exactly,
I love that phrase, because who didn't love recess when they were in school? But ironically enough, when you talk about language, as soon as you say gym class, there were a bunch of people that didn't like gym class in school, but they loved recess because recess was more associated with play. So I find the concepts so interesting. Now, let's get into how you actually talk about this and work through this with clients, because I think that's maybe one of the more instructive directions we can take this conversation. The first question I have is, when you introduce this concept of play to a client, and being very different from what they've heard their entire life, which is, hey, you got to do, sets and reps and rest intervals and all that jazz. Is there a little bit of a kind of adaptation period to them, like thinking about this differently? How's that process go when they're coming to you expecting to hear, we're going to do sets, reps, this and that, and you say, let's talk about play? What's that mindset shift like for the clients you work with? Is it instant? Does it take time? How does that work?
Well, that's a really good question. I'd say there's 2 things there. One is, as an adult, giving yourself permission to play rather than having to work out is it's a relief. Yeah. My clients are often amazed that it counts, this whole idea, right? Like, what do you mean? Like my chores around the house, they count? Yeah, they do. All movement matters. So, you maybe are doing more than you think already. And how can we build on that? How can you start the awareness, right? A lot of people go through a lot of life, they're busy, not paying attention to the framework that, we're trying to get, at least I call it in my book, the bare ass minimum someone's ready, willing, and able to do. Sorry, I don't know if you have to bleep that word.
No, we're good.
Anyway, and in fact, I started with a new client in the fall, and I send my new clients, my book, so that they really understand, a lot of the philosophy of how I help people. And we had a coaching call, and she was so relieved. She said, "Oh my gosh, I just loved what you wrote. And I said, well, let's talk about that. What did you like to do as a kid?
Yeah.
And start there. So if you are too busy and you are in a car and you are at a desk and all of those things, what did you like to do as a kid? And she said, oh, I loved badminton.
Mm.
And I said, well, that's awesome. And it was summer, right? I mean, you can play badminton inside, of course. But it was summer. And she said, oh my goodness, I have some rackets and I'm going to get them out and play with my nieces.
Yeah.
And I said, fabulous. And the next call, she said, I lost myself I was out there for like an hour and it was so fun. And I said, bingo, you just did it. That's brilliant. Especially empowering them to come up with what they like.
Yeah.
And reinforcing that it all counts. It's important.
I'd like to take a quick break from today's episode to tell you a little something about one of our sponsors. As all of you are well aware, addressing the wellness paradox is a lifelong passion project for me. And when you're going to go on a long journey, it's difficult to go it alone. You need to find like-minded individuals that are willing to go on that crusade with you. And that's exactly what I found at the MRF Institute. The team over at the MRF Institute creates educational content for fitness and wellness professionals who are serious about becoming a part of our healthcare continuum. Getting on the healthcare continuum is all about leveling up our skills to be looked at as that valued resource provider. The wellness paradox is certainly an avenue for you to do that, but we need many different levers to pull if we're going to get there. And the MRF Institute is definitely one of those levers. You can go to their website, mrfinstitute.org, to find all kinds of great, informative, free informational content. And if you choose to engage with any of their paid content, they've created a coupon code specifically for Wellness Paradox listeners. You can enter in WP 2022, that's WP, and then the number 2022 to the website at checkout to receive a 15% discount on your purchase. I highly recommend you go check out mrfinstitute.org. Now back to today's episode. Yeah, that's great. It's interesting. Our guest 2 weeks ago on the podcast was Ryan DeLuca from bodybuilding.com, formerly, but started this company, Black Box VR Fitness. And it was gamifying fitness and exercise. And you said something that he said in that episode, which was lose yourself in the activity, right? I feel like you're sitting there, on the treadmill watching the minutes tick away. You're like, oh my God, when is this going to be done? But when you're out there playing badminton with your family, you do lose yourself in the activity. And that's such an interesting way to look at it.
Yeah, thank you. I also really think there's a lot of empowerment in playing with someone else.
Yeah.
Going for a walk, whether you have a pet or not, borrow someone's dog, I don't care. But, call a friend and go for a walk.
Right.
And, after the pandemic, especially, that social connection, the fresh air, it's so invigorating. And it can be that simple. Break it down into what is simple and fun.
Yeah, I'm going to come back to that simplicity versus complexity concept in a second here, because I'm curious to get your thoughts on it. But I do want to talk a little bit, because you are an exercise person, and no doubt you adhere to the standard exercise principles, like, hey, we're going to keep doing more, and we're going to try to keep working a little bit harder. How do you when it's simple in my mind as a fitness professional to think about progression when I have somebody in a gym, right? Where I say, hey, you can go from 15-pound dumbbells to 20-pound dumbbells, or you can go from 3.5 miles an hour on the treadmill to 3.6 miles per hour on the treadmill. But that's a little bit more ambiguous when you're talking about play, which by its nature is more varied. So how do you approach the concept of progression with the clients that you're working with?
Well, that's a good question, because I think there are, obviously, we want clients to progress. The opportunity to progress is to make the things that you do every day easier.
Yeah.
And marking those as progression points.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, the badminton example, I said, it's great that you got out and played, but there are some pieces around badminton, the functional movement patterns for that sport, that if you want to, continue to get better, even though you're practicing, reps of frequency of playing badminton. There are movement patterns you can start practicing outside of your playtime that will help that be easier. And so we put together a plan with whatever equipment they have. Not everybody has equipment, and often it's body weight, but then we progress from body weight. I'm using this as an example still, right?
Yep.
Every case is unique.
Yep.
Body weight to, adding bands, keeping things, progressing, bands heavier, levers, angles. Someone may be interested after progressing to a certain level to add in a TRX, or, or if they have equipment, using it in a different way that they may not have done before, adding in some Tabatas or some, just making sure that they're progressing with some fundamental movement patterns. And we, keep track of those over time.
Yeah, I love what you said there, though. You tied it back to the thing that she playfully enjoyed doing, which was, hey, you could get a lot more out of playing badminton if you did these other things. So you gave those exercises that may have been meaningless to her prior to picking up badminton, having a lot of meaning. I think of this from, I've worked with some, older gentlemen who were golfers, and they could care less about exercise until you tell them that it might add 25 yards onto their drive. And then all of a sudden they're the most motivated exerciser ever because we attached it to something meaningful. So I love that you brought that up. And I think that's the real pearl of wisdom in what you said.
Thanks. Yeah, I agree about that golf thing, though. They really care. We care. We want to hit it further. And if you just do these, and also not overwhelming someone with, all right, so here's the laundry list of all the exercises you need to do to continue to play, blah, blah, blah. It's like, well, wait, what's the barest minimum? What can we progress on? What are you liking to do? And who knew that they actually matter for each other? Because often people think, oh, I have to go do strength training, but for why?
Yeah.
Well, because you can get better at something, even as you age. And I think that's just the human body is just an incredible machine that can continue to work for you if you put in the work.
Yeah.
As long as it's fun. Make it fun.
Absolutely. So I want to go back to this concept of simplicity versus complexity. And I want to get your thoughts on this. And you and I are pretty like-minded, so I'm excited to hear your thoughts. Our industry, broadly speaking, the fitness industry, has tried to monetize complexity to a great degree, and we've almost ignored simplicity. I guess the question is, well, this is a two-part question. Why do you think we've done that to the extent that you can hazard a guess? And then two, what do you think we need to do to get away from that? Because it's clearly not working based upon the statistics that you gave.
It's not working.
Yes.
Well, I think it's alienating people.
Yeah.
Why? You're creating such specific outcomes for not everybody that wants them.
Yeah.
Not everybody, believe it or not everybody wakes up and wants to be, a fitness model.
Yeah.
Or the realization that to get there, you have to give up a lot. And it's not saying that you can't, but I just think that's there. It works because it's flashy, and that whole, all or nothing mindset speaks to the psychology of people. Like, oh, this is the next thing. And oh, that's going to work. And yeah, people make a lot of money.
Yeah.
With that. But what happens after that? Play is for life. We're not talking about this all or nothing, having, the end date, and then what? Mm-hmm. And I think that's where the fitness industry needs to wake up a little bit, because yeah, sure, it's great to make people fit for a short period of time, but I hope people really want to play the long game here, because ultimately that's what health and wellness is for. Really. And the other part of the what can we do? Start talking to people in a way that they understand that when they sign up with you, this isn't, sure, you can sign up and work with me for X number of months for a specific goal. And then after that, continue the conversation of how you can keep showing up. It may not be as frequently with that person, but keep a pulse on how they're doing. I think that's a huge opportunity, because once they're gone, they're not gone. There's more people are capable of. And if you're speaking the right language to them and making it inclusive, then I think we can hit some gold for sure.
Yeah, I think you said it there at the end. It is a twofold process, right? It's using the right language and knowing what to say and what to steer clear from, because there's certainly a lot of language that is very off-putting to a lot of people. Like I dislike using the word gym, because as soon as you use the word gym, a lot of people are going to go, well, hey, the gym's never been for me. The idea of movement or play versus exercise. These seem like subtle things that don't really matter, but because we don't think of it like they matter, but the people that we need to serve do. But the other thing you said that I think is so valuable is to get people to expand their horizons on the timeline here, right? Like, yes, I know you want to get ready for, insert an event here, wedding, class reunion, divorce, whatever it is.
Sure.
But then what, right? And I think that's a real skillful element that a coach or a fitness professional could take, is to get people to take the short term and shift it to the long term.
Yeah, we're talking about behavior change, right? Yeah. We're talking about working with where they're at and what they're doing, and keeping those behaviors, the positive changes going. And also, I think just tying into the one important piece here is people don't like to fail. Yeah. And I think a lot of these short-term money-making pieces, people will sign up for them, and 2 weeks in, it's too much, right? We're not in the business of doing things that suck. We're in the business of doing things that help people, and talk to them like that. They deserve it. There's 80% of the people out there are not even doing enough. And yeah, we have such an opportunity, Michael, such an opportunity to help them. Yeah,
absolutely. And it starts by a different kind of message, because, if the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over, different result, we're there, right? I mean,
oh yeah,
what you said is so true. I have a friend of mine who tells a story that 40 years ago, he was in a boardroom with a bunch of executives from the different fitness companies, and they said, hey, we're only working with 15 to 20% of the public. What do we do about it? And then he said he was in another boardroom 40 years later, a couple of years back, and anyway, we're only working with 15 to 20% of the public. What do we do about it? And like nothing changed in 4 decades or more. So I think this message is so powerful, and it's so important. I think it speaks to a lot of things that we talk about on the podcast. So I'm excited for our listeners to be able to hear this conversation. I'm excited for them to be able to dive into your book and some of the work you're doing. Where can our listeners go if they want to find out more about you and all the great work you're doing?
JanetOmstead.com is my website. There is a change coming to my website. I was listening to a podcast with Jason Goodman, and he's on the same trajectory. So it should be ready by January, but it will still be there. JanetOmstead.com. I have downloads that are a part of my book. And for, I was thinking about this morning, they really can speak to a trainer that is looking for some tools to use with clients. Play tracker. I don't actually call them, I call them, what do I call them? I call them not exercises for people to do. They're kind of frameworks that people can download. So there's 6 or 7 of them on my website. I'm also on LinkedIn. At Janet Omstead, and Instagram at Janet Omstead. And that's pretty much the best place to find me.
Awesome. Well, we're going to link up to all that on the show notes page, as well as, how people can get, access to your book. It's great that you have those resources out there, because I think anytime you could provide frameworks to make a conversation like this a little more concrete, I think that's super helpful. So we'll link up to all that. But before I let you go, and you've listened to the podcast, so this question is coming your way.
Yes.
So I consider the wellness paradox to be the gap in communication and trust and interaction between fitness professionals and medical professionals. I have a sense of where you're going to take the answer to this question, but I'll ask it to you anyway. What's one piece of advice that you could give fitness professionals to close off that gap?
The piece of advice I would say is, every fitness professional should have a doctor in their toolbox, or every doctor should have a fitness professional in their toolbox, to build collaboration and trust, which you spoke about recently in your five steps to professionalizing the fitness industry. You spoke about that. Yeah, we're not in an alienation here. We need each other more than ever, I think. And the same way a GP would refer a client or a patient to a specialist if they had a heart problem or a ligament issue, or, our industry needs to be seen as a specialist for lifestyle.
Yes.
And the first, I would hope, here's something that just happened actually that drives this point home. I have a client that recently was told by their doctor that they needed to lose over 50 pounds by May.
Oh, that's helpful.
And didn't take into account their past, didn't, had no idea, no help in terms of who to go talk to, and suggested they diet.
Yeah. And
it shattered them. It took a lot of work to just help motivational interviewing, really diving down into where we could start and how to reframe the mindset.
Yeah. Rather
than that same doctor saying, wow, okay, you know what? I think you can do this. Here's a list of 10 professionals I recommend. This is a female in her 50s. This is a male in his 20s. Find the person that fits you. And I think people really deserve that, because that is the client that comes to me. Oh my gosh, I've been told I have high blood pressure. What do I do? And we really can work together, because we can change the stats if we empower people to get the help they need in a collaborative manner.
Absolutely. Collaborate. Janet Omstead, thank you so much for joining us on the Wellness Paradox.
Thank you, Michael, for having me. It's been so fun talking to you.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Janet as much as I did. If you found it insightful and informative, please share with your friends and colleagues. Those shares make a huge difference for us. Any information we'd like to share with you from today's episode can be found on the show notes page by going to wellnessparadoxpod.com/episode 85. Please be on the lookout for next week's episode when it drops on Wednesday. And don't forget to subscribe through your favorite podcast platform. Until we chat again next week, please be well.